Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this policy dialogue at COP30 Insights, Implications, and the EU's Path Forward, our annually held event where we discuss all things COP. The event is organized in collaboration with the Connecting Europe project, which is hosted by the EPC and funded by Stiftung Mercator. I'm Brooke, Policy Analyst for the EPC's Sustainable Prosperity for Europe program, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. COP30 was a milestone moment, marking 10 years since the Paris Agreement was adopted. I often open this event by reflecting on the widening gap between escalating climate impacts and the level of ambition delivered at COP. And while this year may be no exception, it also brought something new and quite sobering. For the first time, parties formally acknowledged the likelihood of overshooting 1.5 degrees Celsius this century. The final outcome also, as many of you may know, drew mixed reactions. Concerns were raised around the emission of fossil fuels from the final text, as well as a roadmap to end deforestation. Moreover, particularly with one of its labels being the implementation COP, the discussions and outcomes beg the question as to whether COP, as it stands, is fit for purpose for this next implementation phase. This COP, however, also offered important signs of progress. It hosted the largest gathering of Indigenous representatives in the history of the process, a reminder of the leadership and lived experience that must shape global climate action. We also saw steps forward on adaptation, a theme growing in urgency as communities confront the realities of a warming world. And on that note, I want to highlight that the EPC published a commentary just yesterday on the cross-dimensional importance of adaptation, while an op-ed will be published soon offering further COP reflections. So please go ahead and check those out either on the EPC webpage or find it through our LinkedIn page. But for now, we've got quite a lot to cover. And thankfully, we have 5 amazing speakers with us here today to do this. Today, we are joined by Samira Ben Ali, the European Economic and Social Committee's Youth Delegate to COP for 2025 and 2026. Samira also holds various other roles, working on climate and biodiversity, including as a campaigner with World's Youth for Climate Justice. Matilda Lindblad, advisor for Business Europe, working on EU and international climate topics and leading Business Europe's engagement with the UNFCCC process. Shuva Raha, fellow and lead on international cooperation for the Council on Energy, Environment, and Water, as well as being a policy fellow for the Global Solutions Initiatives, and thirdly, a COP observer since 2016. Paulo Henrique Zerbinati, Counsellor for Environment, Climate Change, and Energy with the Brazilian mission to the EU, and Dimitrios Zevgolis, Head of Unit for Multilateral Affairs with DG CLIMA at the European Commission, who will be logging on shortly. So thank you all very much for joining us here today. We'll be beginning with introductory remarks from each of our speakers, helping set the scene on some key takeaways and insights. Then the floor will be open for Q&A, so I encourage you all to write your questions in the chat as we go along. Please keep them concise, though, and direct them to a specific person when relevant. And with that, let's get into it. I'll first pass the floor to Samira to kick us off based on your work at COP30, so please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for this invitation, and it's a true pleasure to be here to debrief about COP and also to really start to think about what is next. Even if we just finished, we also need to start thinking about that. And I must say that for many of us youth living COP, we're disappointed by the result of this COP30, and I think it did not deliver on these promises. We went to COP, we were told that this will be the COP of truth, this will be the COP of implementation, and this will be the COP of the people. And we believe those promises because for us, they are not just slogans. For us, this is a matter of lifelines. We went to COP expecting action that matched the urgency of the crisis that we're living through. And we're seeing that because we're seeing that the science is clearer than ever. 1 month before COP, we had the Global Tipping Point report that was telling us that we're dangerously close to irreversible threshold, including coral reef diebacks, disruption of the Atlantic Ocean circulation, Amazon forest dieback, and mountain glacier disappearing. Also, before COP, what we saw is that the NDC that were submitted, because they were supposed to be submitted this year, all of them, first in February and then in March and then in September. And what we saw is that at the end of September, only around 60 countries had submitted their NDCs. And just before COP, we saw an increase of that number, but that was just not enough. And for those who submitted their NDCs, the NDC gap report is clearly showing us that we're not on track for limiting global warming to 1.5 degree Celsius. We're more on track to be around 2.3 degree or 2.8 degrees Celsius, which is something that is extremely worrisome. And also another report, the 2025 Lancet Countdown on Health and Climate Change, tells us that one person dies every minute due to the rising temperatures. So all of the science is clearly telling us that we're not going into the right direction, even if progress were made thanks to the UNFCCC framework and all that comes with that. But this is just not enough. And this is not enough, not only on the science, but on the felt realities of young people who came from crop where they went there, some of them watching their home disappear. I can talk about the flood that happens in Southeast Asia, also the Hurricane Melissa that tore through the Caribbean, the fire, the drought, the storm, the heat wave that swept all across continents throughout the year. And I want to be clear that this is not, I'm not trying to be a doomist. This is not doomism because I know that this doesn't help, but this is the reality of how we came to COP. And this is why our hopes were so high. And we recognize that some progress were made. We saw some movement on adaptation, just as was mentioned but right now, but not real clarity. We were, for this particular COP, we're waiting for a long list of global adaptation indicators, which were adopted, 59 of them, but last minute political interference weakened their credibility and left country without real guidance on how to measure progress. So this is actually not a conversation that was closed this year, but that will continue, especially during the SBs. We saw some also progress on the national adaptation plans that were long awaited for recognition. We saw some movement, really interesting movement happening with a just transition mechanism that was established. It's the first step forward to improve international cooperation, technical support, and knowledge sharing. And also, I must acknowledge that the gender action plan was finally agreed on, strengthening commitment to gender-responsive climate adaptation and recognition of how race, disability, age, inequality shape vulnerability and access to climate solution. And these were important. These are momentum that matter, but at the end of the day, we are still not on track. The fact that the roadmap to phasing out of fossil fuel is still such a controversial point after 30 years of such conferences is a clear letdown. And many questions still remain to be answered. On the matter of adaptation, when we talk about finance, there was a promise that was made to triple the adaptation finance, but with no clear roadmap for that, with no clear baseline. And I think a lot of conversation on finance left people left out. So if we truly believe in intergenerational equity, then we must accelerate. And this is more important even this year because we recently received a decision by the International Court of Justice, an advisory opinion that clearly stated that states have legal obligation under international law to stay in line with 1.5 degree. And that means a certain number of action to mitigate the climate, adapt, but also cooperate. And that also would mean to regulate fossil fuels, to the production, the consumption, the licensing of fossil fuels, and must be regulated and to cooperate internationally for the most vulnerable. So this is not just a matter of political will, it's a matter of staying within our legal norms that we are setting for ourselves. This is a matter of science, this is a matter of moral and urgency. So we just expect to see more for after this COP. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think a podcast I was listening to or an article, they referred to the fossil fuel roadmap as it's similar to holding 3 decades of lung health conventions without ever mentioning smoking. So indeed, a concern. But especially when we're talking about finance, there is an independent report as well that came out that noted a lot of this is primarily going to have to come from the private sector. And when we're talking about decreased ambition, or rather a lack of consensus perhaps between parties, this is where non-state actors become increasingly important. So maybe this is a good segue to you, Matilda, to provide your insights as well on your work at COP30. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. And thank you very much for having me in this panel. I think it's a great moment to take stock of COP30 as we've all come a little bit further in processing the 2 weeks. I think there's still some reflections to be had, and I'm very glad to also hear from other panelists here today. If we take a step back, before we entered into COP, we had set out our expectations for the negotiations across 5 different priority areas. It was about increasing global ambition and delivering on ambitious NDCs, implementing Article 6, deliver on the new climate finance goal from Baku, advance climate resilience efforts, and also ensure that a just transition includes competitiveness. And I'd like to zoom in on the outcome in a few of these areas, starting with mitigation ambition, the big topic. So from a business perspective, we were coming into this COP looking for more countries to adopt similarly ambitious targets as the EU, and most importantly, taking actions to deliver. Because we see that European businesses are decarbonizing, they're bringing solutions for the net zero transition and fully support Paris Agreement, but they need a global level playing field, and they need clear commitments from others and predictability to play their part. If we look at the outcome, on the positive side, parties were able to agree on a deal with only 1 day delay. And it sends signals in support of the Paris Agreement. It keeps 1.5 alive, even though, as you mentioned, Brooke, for the first time, it's talking about a potential overshoot. It doesn't backtrack, in my view, but on the negative side, it doesn't take too many steps forward. And as mentioned by Samira as well, the NDC submitted will lead us to over 2 degrees temperature increase. And the response to the NDCs was quite weak. We had voluntary steps to follow up on paragraph 28 of the global stocktake decision from Dubai. We had the big political decision was the Multilateral decision, covering the 4 different contentious agenda items that the presidency removed from the agenda and then had consultations on throughout the 2 weeks, which seems to have been quite effective in terms of avoiding a long delay of the adoption of the agenda. And in this Multilateral decision, there were some steps taken to implement the NDCs. We had the voluntary global implementation accelerator and also a presidency-led Baleine mission to 1.5. And these seems to be good intentions. I think we should recognize that, but it's difficult to now assess the impact. This remains to be seen. And we know that this is a compromise where some parties were pushing against having any NDC response at all, saying that it's nationally determined and not subject to negotiations. Moving on to trade and climate, which I'd also like to focus on a bit, which is a big topic of huge importance to businesses. Unilateral trade measures was again a contentious issue. It has been discussed before within the negotiations on response measures at previous COPs, but now it also trickled into a wide range of other negotiations on the Multilateral decision and also the just transition discussions. And we saw that in the final Multilateral decision, it has wordings on unilateral trade measures, saying that they should not constitute a means of arbitrary or unjustifiable discrimination or disguised restriction on international trade. And it also announces a new dialogue on climate and trade, with some involvement of trade institutions such as the WTO. And this is also in addition to the Integrated Forum on Climate Change and Trade, which was also launched at COP, also aiming to discuss climate and trade. CBAM was heavily criticized, which is not new, in particular we saw from the Arab group, like-minded developing countries, African group. But we also heard, and I would be happy to also hear from the Commission on this, we heard that there are more constructive voices raised in closed-door meetings but being more critical in public debates. So it raises some questions on how much is a negotiation tactic to get through concessions on other tracks or delaying the process, and how much corresponds to the severity of their concerns. And if we focus a bit on our position on these topics coming into COP, first and foremost, increase global ambitions to create a level playing field. That's the key. But until we have and see clear and measurable commitments and legislative actions around the world to reduce emissions, the EU will have to continue to rely on measures to counteract carbon leakage. We have to promote methodological alignment across carbon pricing frameworks announced or being developed across the world to make sure that we reduce fragmentation, strengthen trust, transparency, and interoperability. And there was an open coalition on compliance carbon markets launched to enable collaboration on emission trading systems, MRV, carbon accounting. And to my understanding or my assessment is that this could be a good step or a good platform to enhance collaboration. It's very important that discussions on trading climate are balanced, that you look at both opportunities and challenges with various policy options, and that you don't single out only one party's legislations. We have still seen the opposite, a very negative discussion. So I think this is something that we have to continue on and see if this can be improved. We have also always stressed the need for the EU to have a dialogue with trading partners, but it must be done in the right forum with those who have the mandate and the expertise to manage the issues. We have very heavy agendas already for climate negotiations, and we want them to continue to focus on very critical climate issues and not duplicate WTO discussions. So we have to see how these new dialogues and forums, if they could be a useful forum to have this kind of dialogue that we think is needed, or if it risks duplicating discussions. So that's something to be further assessed. Just to finish off, just to mention briefly on Article 6 and carbon markets, this is also a topic of huge importance for European businesses. There were supposed to be no negotiations, given that the rules were adopted in Baku, which we were very much welcomed, the adoption of the rules. Now there was a move to reopen some standards on the 6.4 crediting mechanism, because some viewed them as too strict on nature-based removals, but in the end, this was not revoked. For us on Article 6, going forward, it's really key to move forward quickly now with implementation. Make sure that trading of credits kickstarts as soon as possible, because we know that carbon markets is key to mobilize climate finance and to create cost-effective emissions reductions. And we need to see here still a boosted project pipeline and increased demand. And here the EU can contribute. So just to wrap up, it's a bit of a mixed bag. On the negotiation side, it does keep the Paris Agreement alive, doesn't take too many steps forward on ambitions and implementations. On the non-negotiation side, which is also a crucial part of COP, even though it's a separate world, I saw a big commitment and strength within the private sector to contribute with solutions, provided that the enabling conditions are secured. So I think this is also something that I would like to highlight. Thank you very much, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much. And I think it's also interesting to note that this was the first COP where trade was formally discussed as well. So interesting to understand like the dynamics there within. But Shuva, I now pass the floor to you to add to these interjections. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon from India. I'm Shuva. I belong to a think tank called the Council on Energy, Environment and Water based in New Delhi. And I'm happy to report that our CEO, Dr. Arunava Ghosh, was special envoy for South Asia nominated by the Brazilian presidency. So we had a ringside view, if you will, to not just the COP actual process, but the build up to the COP. And this started around mid-year. And we had several consultations. There was a lot of interaction with the Brazilian presidency, including Ambassador do Lago, an attorney, Minister Marina Silva, and so on and so forth. We also hosted the conversation that Minister Silva was hosting with various regions. So we hosted the talk on South Asia, which had representation from various countries in our neighborhood. So Nepal, Bhutan, Maldives, Sri Lanka, etc. So all of them got a platform, and I thank Brazil for this. We thank Brazil for this, that these countries had a direct route to also voice what was most important to them. And these were then compiled by Brazil into what are called the granary of solutions. You would have heard the word granary said repeated times. So there's a granary of solutions for South Asia. It's a granary of solutions overall. And before I get into the expectations and all, why this particular process becomes important is that there is a lot of perception gap that is happening right now as to who is doing what. And a lot of the conversation has become numeric or purely numbers, and the actual action on the ground, especially in developing countries which are not documented effectively or shared effectively, are not being, first of all, learned about, but also recognized as efforts on the ground that may or may not be included in NDCs or SDGs and so on and so forth. So just being purely mechanical in our approach to these processes is overlooking a lot of on-ground success. We may need to recalibrate, and I have some data that goes into that. But before that, Samira started with the point that this was the COP of truth. And one of the things that we posited from the developing country side is that there are many truths. And what is the truth? And so we have differences of socioeconomic development. Our revenue streams are different. Vulnerabilities vary. Political priorities, geopolitical imperatives, defense, supply chains, everything is in climate play right now. We also do not often talk of the trade-offs that come with choosing one pathway or the other. And we have also, even in this COP, not really touched a lot on the new technologies that are coming in, their demands on energy, their demands on water, other resources, infrastructure. Deeper conversations are needed, and very specific NDCs might, going forward, be required of how we are going to manage, let's say, 25 years down the line, the infrastructure services we have versus what we are currently using, and only linearly focusing upwards from our current situations. Brazil has been, of course, we are focused on the action agenda and implementation. We've spoken a little about this. Some of the expectations that we went in with, and not just CEEW or India, but the developing countries in general, one of the discussions that was going on for a long time, even before COP, was on the adaptation indicators. So we started with thousands of them. Then it was kind of brought down to 400. So now we have a broad consensus. And within that also, the caveat is that countries can choose which to report on, which to adopt, etc. So, and there'll be a 2-year pilot to see how this goes. For instance, Sri Lanka has different indicators than Bhutan, and they would be reporting on different things. So we'll have to see how to then bring them together and equate action or outcomes when we start measuring these. The adaptation fund is spoken about this. From doubling, the original plan was to double by 2025, which was then changed to tripling by 2030. Now we have agreed to 120 billion USD by 2035, which is better than what we had of $40 billion a year. So there's a lot of negotiation over here, but the amount is fairly, it's moving around significantly. We'll have to see how much of this is actually realized. For context, the loss and damage fund has now commitments of about $800 million, which is hardly anything. One of the examples that we came across was that the change of name of the US Department of Defense to Department of War, just the logistics of that would be $2 billion. And the loss and damage fund with all its contributions is just $700 to $800 million. So that's the kind of money that is available in the world, but not available for climate finance. And this becomes relevant as we go forward and look at implementation. The other data that India, for instance, had pushed for was look at the Article 9.1, the Baku to Belém roadmap, which was how do we get developed countries to provide resources for the 300 billion that has been commissioned. There was no decision on this. A 2-year work program has been set up, and we'll see how that goes. So basically, there was not much movement on this, though this process started in Baku. And of course, the unilateral trade measures, we've spoken of CBAM already. Now, India was one of the countries that wanted to have CBAM on the agenda because it is linked to the UNFCCC's Article 3.5, which says that a supportive and open international economic system has to be the bedrock of these climate conversations. Our take is that the CBAM as it currently stands is not aligned with that. However, as we've discussed, it's again going to dialogues. We'll see how that pans out. There's a discussion on whether we should be discussing WTO stuff. But if trade and carbon are brought into transactional levels or used for protectionism or used for even weaponized in certain ways for penalties or sanctions as we get closer to the 1.5 crisis point, this will not remain purely a trade or transactional issue. So we see this process also being left open. We'll see where that goes. On an aside, India and EU are in talks for the free trade agreement. It's been several years. We expect a conclusion to this in 2026. In that, we will see how this issue of CBAM is worked out with an FTA. We'll maybe see some mechanisms over there. Just a few days before COP, we of course introduced the two roadmaps to phase out fossil fuels, deforestation. The fossil fuels was of course very controversial. Again, it was on an agenda item. It was a roadmap that the presidency introduced. There was a lot of conflict about that. And it's again gone in for more discussion and debate. So again, we'll have to see the countries that are pushing for this, how they are performing on phasing out their fossil fuels, and then we'll see if there are any models that the countries that are not on board can adopt from there. I want to share certain data on, we keep talking about ambition gap and also that's understood. I want to share some data as I close on the partnerships and initiatives that come out of COPs. And this is because I've been to COPs for so many years. And one track is a negotiation track, but the other track are the opportunities that COP provides to have partnerships, negotiation, initiatives that are launched by countries, launched by groups, etc. So our organization, our team did study on about 203 partner initiatives over the past 5 years that are official partnerships. And there's some shocking numbers. First of all, less than 5% have accomplished their stated goals. And almost a third have had no updates since the original announcement of the initiative. So what is happening out of the COP? These are things that are coming out of COP, but we don't know what's happening to them after that. Also, less than a third of these are focused on developing countries. Then less than a third are on global south countries, that is Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Most span general regions, whereas we right now need very focused region because one size of solutions doesn't fit every country. Only about a fifth, and this is very important, only about a fifth of these initiatives included participation from subnational actors. And this is stark because UNDP has noted that 50 to 80% of all mitigation and adaptation action is done at the subnational level. So we can see that the actual actors are not even in this conversation. But on the flip side of this is where a lot of reporting, like I said in the beginning, are not accounted for. I'll just give a small example before I stop. India has, for instance,
interrupt.
Yes.
Perhaps we can come back to the full-fledged case study or a detail in the questions.
Sure.
Just for timing, need to go through to other speakers. Thank you so much. And Paulo, we've been mentioning a lot of initiatives, both positive and negative. So I want to give you the chance as well now to take the floor. I know this has been a challenging presidency, so very eager to hear your perspectives and key reflections. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, the European Policy Center, for inviting me to take part in this event. It's an honor for me to discuss the outcomes of COP in Belém from the Brazil's perspective. As the host country, Brazil assumed the responsibility of guiding the discussions, facilitating dialogue among all stakeholders, and ensuring broad engagement. This means not only governments participating in the formal negotiations, but also, given that this was the COP of implementation, a wide range of actors such as the private sector, academia, research institutes, NGOs, civil societies, indigenous people, you name it, all working together in the search for solutions to address global warming. For this reason, at this COP, the climate action segment, which included 30 key objectives, saw unprecedented engagement in the history of the COPs. The COP brought together representatives from 195 countries and more than 42,000 participants. This is an impressive achievement considering the logistical challenges of traveling to Belém. The event also had the highest indigenous participation in history, with 5,000 indigenous attendees in total, 306 of them from Brazil. As the host country, Brazil's task was to facilitate mutual understanding, to strike a balance between interests of the global north and global south, between energy and nature, between technology and people, between mitigation and adaptation, and between commitments and implementation. The 29 decisions adopted by consensus, collectively referred as the Belém political package, included agreements on wishes such as just transition, adaptation, trade, gender, technology, renewing the collective commitments to accelerate action and making the climate regimes more connected to people's daily lives. For this set of decisions, I would highlight the following. Commitment to triple adaptation finance by 2035, emphasizing the need for developed countries to significantly boost climate finance for developing nations. Belém Mission to 1.5, which aims to encourage higher ambition in NDCs by fostering dialogue and on the international cooperation and investment necessary to achieve this goal. Global implementation accelerations focusing on action with the greatest potential for scale in the climate effort. Creation of the Belém mechanism for a just global transition, an instrument to support countries in ensuring that the transition to sustainable economies is fair and inclusive. And as Shuva mentioned, the 59 voluntary indicators to measure progress within the framework on the global goal on adaptation. The formal decisions strengthen the rights and inclusion of women, indigenous people, and Afro-descendant communities, in addition to recognizing the fundamental role of subnational governments in implementing climate solutions. Given the importance of creating new mechanisms to accelerate implementation, several coalitions were launched, bringing together countries with shared interests around specific themes. Unlike formal processes, these coalitions are formed without the need for consensus. I would like to highlight the following. First of all, the pledge on sustainable fuels, which is a voluntary pledge to quadruple the use of sustainable fuels by 2035. Call to action on integrated fire management and wildfire resilience, which is an important issue now. Declaration on hunger, poverty, and human-centered climate action. And as mentioned by Matilda, the coalition, the open coalition on compliance carbon markets, and the integrated forum on climate change and trade, which creates a space where countries can address the increasingly contentious intersections between trade policies and climate action. The Brazilian presidency also launched the Tropical Forest Finance Facility to provide the means to keep forests standing by offering stable and predictable support to countries that protect and expand their natural forests. As you all know, one of the topics with the highest impact in the media was the debate on fossil fuels. Although the parties were unable to agree on formal language, the Brazilian presidency announced on its own initiative process to develop a roadmap on transition to fossil fuel-free economy in a just, orderly, and equitable manner, along with a roadmap on forest and climate roadmap to halt and reverse deforestation. These two roadmaps are intended to keep the issue at the center of discussion in the lead-up of COP31, looking to the future, right? In a particular challenging political context, the COP in Belém demonstrated that through multilateralism and engagement of diverse actors, it's possible to advance global efforts to combat climate warming within the framework of the Paris Agreement. We value the constructive support of the EU during the negotiations, a strategic partner for us on climate and sustainable development agenda. Brazil views the results of COP30 with great optimism. The decisions adopted in Belém provide concrete instruments to accelerate global action, strengthen the centrality of climate justice, and reaffirm the conviction that only through robust international cooperation can we secure a safe, resilient, and a sustainable future. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paulo, for this overview. And indeed, as you highlight, a challenging geopolitical and geoeconomic landscape that hope to get more into in the Q&A. But for now, I'll pass the floor to you, Dimitrios, please. And just a reminder, very quick to our audience, after this, the Q&A will be open for the audience. So please feel free to put your questions in the chat. It seems there's already one. So just a reminder, and thank you, Dimitrios.
Thank you for inviting me, and sorry for this awkward screen angle, but I'm calling from my phone because my computer for the last hour is running through a problem, and I'm trying to fix it. So I will have to talk to you from my phone screen. I think that I have heard quite a few comments with regards to the outcomes of this COP and the politics of this COP. So I'm not sure if it makes sense for me to repeat all this list of outcomes that we had. So I would like to focus a bit more on a couple of elements that I would like to highlight. The first is that indeed, literally every COP that we're experiencing, at the end of the COP, we all feel that we had some gains, but we had some losses. And yes, it is. The COPs are always mixed bags. But I think that we need to see this COP more in function of the point where we stand now with the implementation of the Paris Agreement, as well as how far we are from where we need to go. And this COP happened really at the end of a long process of 10 years that we were putting in place the rules under the Paris Agreement. It happened at the moment that we have completed most of all the mandates that we had introduced with the adoption of the Paris Agreement in 2015. So the global stocktake has already been made. Already we had the first cycle of the biennial transparency reports, and we had as well the finalization of a decision on the new climate finance goal for the year 2035. So all these important mandates have been in our pockets, essentially. And we were starting this year with the understanding that now we need to talk more about ambition. We need to focus more on what is left to be done. And this opportunity has been given to us by the fact that this was the year that we will know where we stand with the biennial transparency reports that have been delivered by the parties, as well as we will have a feeling of where our ambition stands on the basis of the national determined contributions that we all had to provide. And I think that that's where we are coming with some, let's say, lukewarmish results, because the ambition that the NDCs that have been provided so far, and unfortunately we don't have NDCs from all the parties, we have only from 2/3 of the parties that represent less than 80% of the global emissions. This ambition is taking us only 12% below by 2035, below the emissions that we had in 2019. And we know very well that this is not enough. This is a fraction of what needs to be done in order to achieve the emission reduction that will keep us on a 1.5 trajectory, or even in a below 2 degrees trajectory. So we are having a huge gap in emission reductions in order to achieve the Paris goals. And this is our main concern. And of course, we are missing some NDCs. I hope that the other big economies that haven't put forward their NDC ambition, they will come forward pretty soon. And we will be able to consider these figures in our collective ambition. But as things stand right now, we are in trouble. We have a huge gap. And we need to work collectively in order to fill this gap. And I was hoping, and I think as you we were hoping that this honest discussion will happen in this COP. Unfortunately, I think in the 2 weeks of the COP, we didn't have much progress on that. And there are many reasons for that. I would say that it is also a result of the fact that a major economy and major emitter have decided to leave the Paris Agreement. They were not present in the negotiations, and that probably empowered some parties that are not comfortable with that discussion to push to a direction that this discussion wouldn't happen. So that was one of the main, let's say, observations that I would like to make. However, with a lot of negotiation and with the support of the co-presidency, we managed to have an outcome that keeps this discussion ongoing for the next year. And with this global implementation accelerator and the mission 1.5 that remain initiatives that have been mandated by the COP decision, by the CMA decision, the Multilateral decision, we feel that under the guidance of the co-presidencies, we will manage to have a more sincere discussion on this issue. At the same time, there have been other issues that have been put on the table. Issues that have not been mandated, and nevertheless, we managed to address those issues with the decision. Colleagues mentioned the climate and trade related discussion. I think that we already had the space for these discussions. That's why we have the response measures standing item for quite a few decades. However, some parties, the like-minded developing countries, are not comfortable with this topic, and they would like to discuss it in a different setting. So at this point, the dialogues that have been agreed will help for parties to have a better understanding on the topic. I think that from the side of the EU that a few countries finger pointed towards the EU, even though that in the negotiations we all agree that we should not finger point. The EU is ready to discuss issues that have to do with carbon border adjustment mechanism and our measures on carbon leakage. We have been very comfortable discussing these issues, but of course, in a discussion that has to trade, there are many other issues that other parties have to talk about. I mean, there are many measures that we see actually that are trade measures. They are not climate measures, but they have impacts in the action of countries. So it will be quite interesting to hear what is happening in this space. So And I think that we had some good developments also when it comes to climate finance, because we will have some processes to follow up on the agreements that we have taken in the past. So we are looking forward to hearing more from the co-presidencies about their plans on how they will engage in the next months, since a lot of the mandates are falling on their hands. And at the same time, we are looking forward to working with all the partners in the next opportunities. There will be ministerial meetings. The EU will hopefully work through the ministerial on climate action in bringing the major economies together in the next months, and in other occasions to see how we can bring more progress in towards COP31. I will stop there and happy to have a discussion with the other colleagues.
Yeah, thank you so much. And the Q&A is now open, so maybe I'll use the opportunity to pull some points that you had just kind of ended on, Dimitrios, on the need for working collectively, but also some of these challenges around keeping the discussion going. And it points to more comment made by Vanya, but I'll interpret it into a question. The comment was around, the previous COP being kind of viewed as unsuccessful, and yet this COP, we're highlighting successes or describing as lukewarm, but the overall consensus of the diplomacy as we're doing it is maybe not working. And so, what is it that we need? If consensus can no longer be relied upon in these fora, what does that mean for the future of the COP process itself? So that's one question, and then I'll add on this question from Pauline as well. And this is a direct question for Samira. So Samira, perhaps we can have both of the questions for you and then go around to other speakers. But the direct question is then how transformative the BLM action mechanism could be for a global just transition in practice, particularly for countries structurally reliant on fossil fuels. So thank you so much, Samira.
Yes, thank you. I think maybe I'll start with the second question on the BLM action mechanism to just continue really on the deep dive of what I've started. First, we need to understand what is the BLM action mechanism. So basically, that is like an institutional framework that has been promised to be developed, which is the word that was used within the last the last decision. And that is falling within the Just Transition Work Program. And it allows to create an institutional future to just transition. And it is based on a few key points that want to be enhanced. First, on international cooperation, technical assistance, capacity building, and also knowledge sharing when it comes to just transition. And this could be really important for fossil fuel reliant countries because BAM, the BLM action mechanism, could be helping them in structuring the international support system. Because right now what we have seen is that there's actually a lot of kind of mechanism or initiative around just transition across the globe that are happening, but they're happening in a way that we don't know if they're actually effective, and they're happening in a way that is not coordinated. So that is also a big point of concern. That's also why we wanted to develop that mechanism. And that will allow those countries to diversify their economy, to retain workers, to protect their communities simply. It's also interesting with this particular mechanism, it has a huge emphasis on human rights. It's a right-based mechanism that is trying to make sure that human rights, labor rights, indigenous rights are completely supported throughout phasing out of fossil fuels, and that is also including free, prior, and informed consent. And it's also a mechanism that is hoping to aim to try to go directly using the national climate instruments that have been that are already existing or in the process of being made, such as the NDC, the national adaptation plans, or long-term strategy in general. Is trying to use existing mechanism to make itself work, so that it's able to be increasingly integrated within the Paris agreements. So with those way of functioning, hopefully, because this mechanism is still to be developed, right? Hopefully, with those framework being put in place, it can allow those fossil fuel reliant countries to try to really diversify their economies and to go away from that. And it's some of the points that were raised for a country who are still developing is that they must make sure within that creation of that mechanism that it's something that is maybe structurally predictable, that is ground-based, and that it doesn't add into the debt burden that some of them are already facing. And that mechanism, if it works in that way, if it's really developed in the next few years in a way that's really taking into account the needs of the most vulnerable countries, I think it could be extremely helpful. On the first question, it was on multilateralism, if I remember correctly. Can you remind me, Brooke?
Yes, so it was on the maybe this would be a good question to direct to Shuva as well, or those who is interested. But the question was kind of around, what is it that we need with regards to multilateralism, diplomacy? If consensus can no longer be relied upon in these fora, what does that mean for the future of the COP process itself? If you have some quick, immediate reactions, and then yeah, perhaps Shuva, you could come in as well afterwards.
Yeah, I think that even if we criticize the different COP processes, I know that I've said that during 30 years we have not seen the progress that needed to keep us within 1.5 degree, but in the same time we must also acknowledge that the COP process has allowed us to actually stay to not go around scenarios of 4 degrees Celsius, right? So this kind of conversation, we don't want to take away from actually what COP brought us, but in the same time, we must acknowledge that yes, indeed, we are seeing many calls that are saying that the COP process in the way it is, it's not fit for purpose. I don't know, maybe you have seen the letter from the Club of Rome that's saying that we should actually change the way it works. The fact that we're seeing lobbyists present who have like conflicting interests during COP is something that is detrimental to the process. The fact that we're seeing civil society demands not really that taking into account is also something that is detrimental. There is also call to have maybe a body that is throughout COP, a scientific body that could really help supplement the COP decision and make sure that they're keeping in track with COP. So there is a lot of discussion on how this process could be improved, and I think that people have a real willingness to improve the process rather than shift away from it. But if things are still staying slow, the initiative that we have seen right now, for example, for the phasing out conference that is going to happen next year, that will be in Colombia, and also I think Brazil is also really supportive of that, and other countries such as in the Pacific, Vanuatu, have seen such processes happen. At the same time, who are trying to push for the ambition. I think we must also encourage those processes because at the end of the day, if those countries go ahead and decide to phase out of fossil fuel, then this could be an extremely good thing for all of us. And it could also encourage the pressure for civil society to not civil society, but for the rest of countries to take part in such initiatives. So I think we must also look into other solutions.
Thank you so much. And Dimitrios, I see you have your hand raised. So Shuva, perhaps we'll go to you and then go to you, Dimitrios, also for the many questions that have now been posted to you in the Q&A. Thank you.
All right, very quickly, a new phrase has been introduced, and I think Dimitrios referred to it, or Henrique, I don't remember, like-minded countries. So I think in the current situation of multilateralism, geopolitics, etc., unanimous consensus is unrealistic to expect. Earlier also, I mean, if let's say the 6 of us want to go for a meal after this, it's difficult to reach consensus on which cuisine we should have. So all countries agreeing in the same form to everything is an unrealistic expectation, especially today because all countries have decided, have started realizing their own priorities, their trade-offs, etc. So this like-minded countries is not a bad thing. It leads to strategic groupings, and which is why, let's say if you have a bunch of like-minded countries who want to take up that phasing out fossil fuels roadmap, can they demonstrate success? Because if they demonstrate success, and there's quite a few of them, about 80 plus of them, that does become a template for other countries to do. So the COP process in any case is a negotiation. In our data and experience, developing countries always give lower NDCs than what they're actually doing, and that's the data. Also, kind of going very quickly, one example: India, for instance, has 500 gigawatts of installed power capacity. That's more than France, Germany, and UK combined. And of that, 50% plus is already non-fossil fuel. So that's 275 gigawatts plus of renewable energy capacity, which is also more than France, Germany, and UK combined. However, that is a fraction of what India would need because we're still energy deficient and we're building our electricity capacity. So where do you get unanimity in things like that? But does that mean that India is not doing enough? We took out 800 million people we just gave them electricity access over the last decade. So progress is happening, and which is why I said the second thing where we are tracking initiatives that come out of each COP. And that is where if you're launching mechanisms, roadmaps, dialogues, partnerships, etc., accountability is the word that needs to come in, that the groups of countries or institutions that are saying that, okay, we'll take on this challenge and we're going to show results for that, that could be then become a template for an NDC or an SDG or whatever. That is not happening because only 5%, less than 5% of them are actually going to completion. So negotiations, yes, but negotiations have their own way because countries are legally they're binding clauses. So countries are careful about that, are not necessarily so. If we do not take the action that's actually happening on the ground, and there the subnational becomes very important, and I keep going back to that a lot of this data that we're churning is not complete, it's not fully informed. And based on that, if we keep ratcheting up the anxiety or the blame games, then we are not going in the right direction. I believe the COP process has conversation value, it has negotiation value, it gets all of us together, gets the topics going, but action is not something that is COP's deliverable. That is mostly the national deliverable and in part a multilateral deliverable.
Thank you so much. And on this point of action, Dimitrios, I'll give the floor to you. There's a question. 2040 targets, a success, though there was an increase from 3 to 5% in the flexibilities. Now it seems likely that the EU will be pushing back the ban on petrol and diesel sale of cars. How can we expect the bloc to be the leader it wants to be on the international stage, particularly with regards to this roadmap? Another question is, what does the absence of a roadmap on phasing out fossil fuels signal about where the political resistance may lie, and what it means for upcoming voluntary initiatives like the Just Transition Away from Fossil Fuels conference? So please.
If you permit me, I will also address some of the other points.
Yes.
I think when it comes to the UNFCCC, I will agree that it's really in the UNFCCC where parties are coming together to negotiate multilaterally agreed outcomes, and that's the big value of the UNFCCC that has put in place the treaty and the Paris Agreement, both the Convention and the Paris Agreement. They have put in place transparency regimes. They have put in place accountability regimes. And now with the NDCs, who we are mandated to represent the highest possible ambition from our side. So I don't think that we should easily say that, no, we can do better, but that's what we're putting in our NDCs. I think that we need to put the highest possible ambition. And we need to look at what these words mean, highest and possible. So we need to go ahead with that. And the process is giving this kind of visibility to what we are doing. And that's the opportunity for us to come together and see if we collectively see that we are not doing enough, then what kind of solutions we need to put forward. But I agree that the multilaterally agreed outcomes are not always enough, because the consensus process can lead us to up to a level. And that's why the plurilateral initiatives, all this action that is being taken by countries or by coalitions or by subnational authorities or the private sector, need to have a space to be represented. They need to be heard, and they need to lead to more cooperation. And that's something that a lot of co-presidencies have managed to provide through these conferences. And I think that also the UNFCCC process, also with events that are happening across the year, they bring. That's the number one. Another thing is that when it comes to the just transition mechanism, indeed, we will operationalize it next year. And I think that definitely we need to see how we can stay true to the principles that we have put forward with this decision and the origins of the discussion on just transition that has to do with the principle of the just transition of the workforce. And I think that that's where we need to be very careful not to fall in the trap of dealing with this as another mechanism, as another way of building new institutions and building new processes, but rather focusing on how we can do better with the processes that we have, with the activities that we have put in place, with the mechanisms that we have put in place in order to keep true to the principle of just transition. And so I think that we need to be very careful there, not to get into a situation where we're talking about just transition, but really what we are putting in place is not delivering on just transition. We can criticize the existing activities that they don't deliver on that, but that doesn't mean that we need to create new activities. We need to see how we can reform the process in order to secure that we're going to have more just transition. That on this topic. Now, there are questions about the EU's ambition. I think that the EU has already very clearly and legally put targets forward. We have a legally binding target for the year 2030. So whatever our policies are delivering in these years, from what we see in this decade, we are on track to achieve this target with the current policies. We're missing about 1% that I think that we need to work with the member states in order to secure that we will get to this 55% emission reduction. And we need to start designing the policies that will deliver on the next target, the 90% by the year 2040. And of course, this is the policy package that my institution, together with the member states, will have to agree in the next years. We are in this phase now to secure that we will go ahead with that, with the adoption of the climate law eventually, and then with the adoption of the policies. I don't want to comment on particular policies because I think that this is beyond the point. The point is that we need to reduce the emissions, and we are doing that. I think I missed the fourth question. Sorry, maybe Brooke, you can help me, or maybe I can look at the Q&A.
That's okay. Yeah, maybe
yes, the just transition away from fossil fuels. Yeah, I think this is. I mean, let's be serious that a roadmap is a big word, because a roadmap comes with a lot of elements. It comes with milestones. It comes with particular activities, and I think that in the UNFCCC process, that indeed has been such great difficulty to have consensus outcomes that even mention the words fossil fuels, have even talking about a roadmap for that, that will be a very hard discussion. The EU stand in support of engaging to such a discussion that could lead to a roadmap. And unfortunately, we couldn't have a consensus on this topic. But it is very positive that we now have the presidency giving support for that. And I welcome also the recent announcement that a national roadmap from Brazil will be prepared. That's great news. And I think that that's the way that we should engage all together. So the conference in Santa Marta in Colombia definitely is going to be a good political moment. Let's see what the hosts are going to put forward. But we are eager to engage on this topic.
Thank you so much. Sorry to interrupt, just so we can get to speakers. Matilda, please, you had your hand raised, so please feel free to come in.
Thank you. Yeah, super interesting to hear from others. Just to reflect or to come in a little bit on this EU leadership, I think what would really make the EU a leader is if we can show that it's if we can combine climate and competitiveness, I think this would really be inspiring for others. And to do so, we have to do some things differently, and we have to take into account. We have to make sure that these go hand in hand in a better way than we have done before. So I think this is really key to have in mind. Also, it was mentioned on the role of lobbyists, and here I feel inclined to come in as well. I'm a lobbyist. I was at COP. We have a great business delegation and a great network on site, and our perspective is that the private sector is key when it comes to implementing the targets that are set forward. We will not have a climate transition without the private sector. So of course, the private sector has to be part of the discussions. And I see a great commitment to contribute to the transition, provided that we have to make sure that we have the enabling conditions there. And that's what we are engaging on and showing what is needed. What does the business sector need to be able to play their role as a key partner on this journey. And also interoperability of global rules is also something that's crucial for the private sector. And here, global cooperation is also key in that sense. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Paulo, maybe we can give the floor to you now, as there are some questions around the roadmap, specifically still, how you view the main pillars should be in the priorities, how stakeholders like civil society could be more involved. Also, maybe I'll tack on here a question as well, so we can kind of begin to focus on some other areas as we go around for maybe a final set of questions before the concluding remarks. I'm also curious to hear a bit more about the, let's say, geopolitical dimensions that kind of factored into these discussions. On the one hand, China and France have issued a joint statement committing to, or change gears now maybe, sorry. The US is, COP31 was followed by the G20 Leaders Summit. The US is expected to be a president next year. How you found that the elephant in the room, or rather elephant not in the room, factored into the discussions, and what you feel that means for the discussions going forward and leadership going forward, whether it's kind of more this emergence towards coalitions of the willing, etc.
Thank you very much. I think the scenario, the geopolitical scenario, is quite challenging, not because of the US is not in the Paris Agreement, but also there is some debates about not about the climate change itself, but the way in which we can fight climate change. And maybe there's no so urgent as we and the science are talking about. So this is an issue that we as the presidents of Brazil and the president of COP, André Correa do Lago, address it through his letters. The idea is to work together towards this goal. So this is one thing about the roadmap. Every country, I think, will have to write a roadmap internally, European Union and also developing countries to see how it will develop their transition away from fossil fuels. So this is one issue. Developing countries has its concerns on progress. What Shuva mentioned also is one of concerns of Brazil. Also, we have our concerns in terms of development. So access to technology is important also. Brazil in this position is in a quite good position, since almost 90% of our electricity matrix is renewable, and 50% of our energy overall is renewable, including transportation. We have our solutions, which you mostly know that is biofuels. Other countries has electrification, so every country has its own way to think in terms of their transition. But this discussion is important in terms of a multilateral level. That's why, although there was no consensus in a text or during COP, Brazil launched a roadmap in this area, not only in terms of transition away from fossil fuel, but another important topic, which is to halt deforestation. So this both topics is intertwined, I think, and hopefully we'll be able to present a draft for the next meetings before COP31. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'll actually pass the floor immediately back to Matilda for a direct question that was posed in the Q&A, specifically on whether you can expand a little bit on these enabling conditions mentioned. Yes, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yes, happy to do so. So this is a big discussion going beyond COP, but if I put it briefly, it's for the sake of time. Well, we have a lot of actions that needed on if you look at the EU side, it's about reducing the cost of energy, speeding up permitting, ensuring access to finance, boosting energy infrastructure, making sure that we have rules that are easy to that are simplified and that we avoid added regulatory burdens. And it's about the investment conditions and making sure that we that they're good and that we can scale up more investments in to for instance scale up renewables and low carbon sources. Permitting, it's about not only energy, but it's also about industrial facilities, etc. And then when we look at the international side, we need, I mentioned, clearer commitments, interoperability of global rules, Article 6, expanded use of carbon pricing beyond Europe is also something that we've really been that we want to encourage as a way to also pave the way for, in the medium to long term, global carbon pricing or more interoperability of carbon pricing systems. So that's the short answer. Happy to expand on some other occasions as well.
Thank you so much. And we have yet another new question. What are the implications of adopting only 59 indicators under the global goal on adaptation? Maybe I'll tack on to this as well, either for Shuva or Samira, if one of you would want to come in. But as you mentioned earlier, parties agreed to triple adaptation finance, but I understand there's also ambiguity around from which baseline and what level of grant-based support this would be as well. So juxtaposed against the UNEP report that shows there's still a persisting gap in adaptation finance, your perceptions on these kind of different questions. Shuva, maybe we could begin with you, and then, yeah, thank you.
All right. I'll just answer the previous question as well in very brief, and I'll take 1 minute to go beyond COP to Stockholm Plus 50, which was in 2022, which was the 50th year of UNEP. And one of the main things of discussion, we had written the official paper with SEI over there, was hard power of countries, right? And now the geopolitical situation has gone back to that. We were trying very hard in the interim to introduce other topics like developmental issues, but it's back to military, money, and to some extent hard markets, which is the GDP related markets. In this sort of circumstance, it really falls upon us to frame our expectations and our narrative within this milieu, saying that because I work with the international government and the bureaucracy, and their question to me always is, in the scheme of foreign policy, where is climate as a priority when you compare it to national defense and such? So whether COP, whether UNEP, whether G20, wherever we go, I'm at most of these forums, the positioning of climate as critical is still fairly limited to the climate community. And till it becomes, we are trying to make it, but now we are backsliding from making it a GDP related issue. So for instance, in India, we have now started saying that the heat related issues are going to lead to GDP losses through productivity loss. So the political will has to be created to see this as something that either harms your military or your money or your markets. And just saying climate for the sake of adaptation mitigation, these conversations are not going to get traction, to my mind, in the world that's unfolding. Now, coming to the adaptation indicators, these are a mix and match. Again, this is the common denominator that has been selected. Many things have been mixed and matched with each other. But like I said, a Bhutan and a Sri Lanka have different expectations. They will report differently. And this is where I think the interoperability that Matilda is going on saying, or the MRV systems, these become very important. Yes, people will start reporting. How are we going to start equating that? How are we going to start linking it to measurable climate action? My concern would be there with anything that we are introducing now, new indicators. So we have the SDGs, they have 169 indicators. Now we have another 59 indicators, and we can keep creating these indicators. The issue is in measuring, tracking, verifying, allocating. If you're doing carbon allocations, doing that correctly, monetizing it properly. That is where the actual issues of these are. And there was a third point on modern plurilateralism and multilateralism, the direction in which it's going. Increasingly, we can say adaptation finance of 300 billion or 125, what the amounts that are needed are in trillions. The countries that, a lot of them are debt stressed. Most countries have to find ways to fund these transitions themselves. And therefore, we need to now really seriously focus on empowering the countries themselves to generate these resources from whatever sources are convenient or accessible to them. And that requires a very minor country, very specific country level, country platform, country level focus. To my mind, we should go towards there to increase the outcomes that we want to deliver these things.
Thank you so much. And Samira, please, the floor is yours.
Yes, I'll keep it short because I know that we're short on time, and a lot has been said also by Shuva, and I'll keep it on the adaptation, the application of the adaptation indicators. So only 59 indicators. It's like the number of it is like not really the most important issue, but it's really about the quality of it. First, we were around 1,000 indicator, and the goal for this COP was to really stay within 100 indicator, and those indicators should be on finance, technology transfer, capacity building, and all of those issues that are extremely important for adaptation, and in particular with the fact that adaptation is a notion that is a bit hard to process and understand because it touches on so many different things and mechanisms. So the quality is really the most important. That's why it was a bit strange at the end of COP when the adaptation evolved suddenly, and now we still need to discuss and revise it until at least 2027. So the implication for this for the adaptation of these indicators, if they're well processed and well revised, I think that they could be a real boost for support for countries. So I'll keep it at that.
Thank you so much. And indeed, we're nearing the end of our discussion today. So for concluding remarks, I'd like to go around to each speaker for a final point. Please use this time to come back to any final points, questions that you'd like to follow up on. But I'd also like you to add in your interjection a priority that you'd like to highlight for COP31. We also haven't even mentioned the bizarre configuration we'll be having for the next presidency, which is the co-hosting between Australia and Turkey. But yes, so perhaps we can go in the incredibly scientific order of the reverse way we did speaker interjections. So beginning with Dimitrios and then going to Paulo, et cetera, et cetera. So please, Dimitrios.
Thank you. No, thank you for the great discussion and indeed very, very important points from all colleagues. I will summarize with two things. I think that first, the UNFCCC process is there. I mean, we I don't like to say keep alive because I mean it's not like we had something in we have some the process in the emergency room. I mean, or in the intensive care. I think that no matter what, the planet survives. But our societies and our economies need to thrive as well. And with the 1.5 degree being overshoot as it goes, we really need to take more action in the next years. So this action needs to be accelerated. I think this is the outcome of COP30, and we have these initiatives that have been agreed that will need to bring us together to discuss how we will accelerate action. So this is my wish for 2026, and I hope that the two presidencies, the Brazilian presidency and Australia as president of the negotiations, will help us to go to COP31 with more substance on these topics. Um, and at the same time, I think that we need to keep on the trajectory that has been built over the years with creating opportunities for parties, non-party stakeholders, the subnationals, the civil society to come together and demonstrate the real action and learn from each other. We're not going to learn from each other through a COP outcome, through a decision of a few pages, but we will learn from each other if we are talking to each other. And the COP can help us to do that. The UNFCCC decisions can help us to do that. But we have also our own action that is happening outside the COPs that needs to keep contributing to that. And with that, again, thank you for the invitation. I'm looking forward to our discussions.
Thank you so much. And Paulo, please.
Thank you. Well, as president of COP, Brazil had three major goals, which was to accelerate implementation, to reinforce the multilateralism, and also to, in some way, to bring that discussions close to people's life and show that the measures and the implementation of Paris Agreement will bring opportunities for everyone. Will bring opportunities for business and in terms of employment and also money for countries. So that was one of our goals. We are a part of the Paris Agreement, but during COP30, we mostly worked as a facilitator, as a negotiator. Of course, we as all of us would like to have more ambition in the results, but as a president, I think we achieved our goals within the multilateral scenario we have today. During this year and until COP31, Brazil will continue to work with the Australia and Turkey and other partner the EU to build the basis for more ambition and also for the implementation of the action agenda. So that's my take. Thank you very much for the invitation. It was a pleasure to discuss the COP outcomes with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Shuva, please.
Okay, so I'm an optimist. I like all these multilateral processes because, like we've said, it's important to at least have the conversation. It's important to have the negotiation. It's important to know where everybody stands. Because otherwise would be all in silos doing strange things and we would not even have a place to convene at least once a year. COP is strange next year. G20 is also very strange next year. We're going to see many strange things happen, but there are common threads. So one of the things that CEEW does is go across all these processes. We also go across sectors. So my one wish list for COP31 would be that we look more at nexus challenges because the UN process is divided. We have a UN COP for diversity, one for desertification, one for climate. but water, food, land, biodiversity, productivity, livelihood, resilience, energy, all of these are now linked at the systemic level. And the solutions to this and financing for these also have to cover whatever is in that system. So funding one part of the system is not going to let us transform that system. So we have now started working on understanding cross-cutting areas. So in addition to energy transition, how do you uplift the water systems, or how do you get the digitalization funds to bring that to the masses? These are conversations COPs increasingly need to have, even if not at the NDC level, but these processes financing for these items need to keep coming on the table. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. And for a dose of optimism, also the sun is shining for the first time in forever in Brussels, so hopefully we can take that as a good sign for something. Yeah. But please, Matilda, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Let's see if I can continue on that on that positive spirit. Because a key message from our side is that businesses are key partners on the journey to net zero, and bringing the solutions. It's very important that they're involved in the process, and that we enable businesses to contribute to the implementation of the rules that are being set and implement the climate ambitions. The need for multilateral cooperation is huge. We have discussed the significant challenges that was faced this year, but I think it still shows strength that there was an agreement reached. Everyone is kind of navigating with the US exiting the Paris Agreement and what that means. We're not happy with the ambition gap. This really has to. I really hope that the sincere conversations that Dimitrios mentioned that will happen now under also by Paulo on the Belém mission to 1.5 and the accelerator, that this will really lead to higher ambitions. But we know that Paris has galvanized climate action since the adoption. So we also have to recognize, of course, where we have come from, but also having two thoughts in the head saying that this is we're not where we need to be and we really need to step up. So that's my key expectation in view of the next year to come, in view of COP31. Really work on NDC implementation and utilizing the strength in the business sector and the solutions that are there. And also carbon markets, huge topic, but implementing Article 6 and increasing collaboration on carbon pricing and carbon leakage measures in a very balanced way. If I limit myself, those are my two wishes. And thanks a lot for having us.
Thank you so much. And Samira, please.
Yes, thank you so much again for this invitation and for the remarks by the other speakers that were really insightful. I think that for me, trying to conclude on this COP, but also on this COP, I really wish that state will come back on the spirit of the Paris Agreement that was drafted 10 years ago. I think that when states were drafting these particular agreements, they really had in light to put science at the forefront of our conversation and trying to make sure that we actually stay aligned with the 1.5 degree pathway. So I want us to stay within that, and that would also include phasing out of fossil fuels. And there are so many different initiatives and conversations that are going around on that, and we have so much material to work with. Something that I forgot to mention, but working with the EESC, we provide opinions to the EU, but they are freely available, and there is one on the phasing out fossil fuel subsidies, for example. So there is already a reflection happening on what can be done. So the paper is there. Plus, the law is encouraging us. I mentioned before the ICG advisory opinion that came out this summer, but before that, there was also another advisory opinion by the Inter-American Court on human rights. There is another one that is coming on the African Court of Human People's Rights, and there was also one by ITLOS, the International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea. We are all pushing towards us getting out of the path that we're set right now and trying to make sure that we are staying within the framework of a livable planet. So I want us to come back to the spirit of the law that we drafted, to come back on the science and making sure that we are staying in the path where we are able to actually live together. So I will leave it at that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Samira, and thank you to all of our speakers today for these final remarks in our discussion today. Thank you as well to the audience for your participation. That marks the end of our event today, and I wish you a pleasant rest of your week. So thank you.
Thank you very much.